Okay, well, it's 7:05. I think we're going to kick things off. So, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Hopefully, you will have a good time. It's been a long time since we've done a virtual event, to be honest, but if we were going to do a virtual event, it was going to be with Reem and Leila. So, we're very excited to do it. Just some quick intros and sort of the event order for tonight. So, we're the Candid Book Club. There's four of us tonight. I'm Linda. We've got Mimi, give us a wave. We've got Omar and we've got Jess. And of course, we've been joined by the amazing Reem Gaafar and Leila Aboulela. And we're so excited to talk about quite a range of topics pertaining to A Mouthful of Salt, which is Reem's novel, and River Spirit, which is Leila's novel. So we're going to keep it spoiler free, everyone, because we appreciate that Reem's book is brand new. And so we don't want to spoil it for people who may not have read either A Mouthful of Salt or River Spirit. But hopefully we leave you with a lot of food for thought. There's also the opportunity at the end to answer some questions. So hopefully you can all see the Q&A sort of speech bubble with a question mark at somewhere on your screen. Please use that throughout the talk, because we are going to allocate about 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end, so we will get around to you. And yeah, Leila, Reem, do you want to say anything before I launch into reading your bios and then letting you all introduce your books?
Well, congratulations to Reem, because this is her new novel and it's her first novel, and it was just published last week, and it won a prize before it got published. So that's very good. MashaAllah.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. It's great being here, and especially being with Ms. Zaid is a great honor. And thank you all for having us today, and for everyone who took the time to attend.
Amazing. So I will start with Leila's bio, and then I'm going to hand over to Leila to tell us a bit about River Spirit. Then I'm going to read Reem's bio. Then I'm going to hand over to you, Reem, to tell us a bit about your book. So Leila Aboulela is an award-winning novelist whose work has received critical recognition for its distinctive exploration of identity, migration, and Islamic spirituality. Her novels have been translated into 15 languages and include Bird Summons, Minaret, The Translator, which is a New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year, The Kindness of Enemies, and Lyrics Alley, which also won the fiction winner of the Scottish Book Awards. Aboulela was the first winner of the Caine Prize for African Writing, and her short story collection, Elsewhere Home, won the Saltire Fiction Book of the Year award. Aboulela grew up in Sudan and in her mid-20s moved to Scotland, where she now resides. So, Leila, I'll hand over to you to tell us a bit about River Spirit.
Okay, so A River Spirit is set in Sudan in the 19th century, in the years leading up to the British invasion. And it tells the story of a Kwani who was orphaned as a young girl of 11, and then she's rescued by a merchant from Khartoum, and how she grows up and against the backdrop of revolution, and eventually the British coming into Sudan. So there's a background of revolution and sort of war, and with this young woman growing up.
Amazing, thanks, Leila. Okay, and then Reem. So Reem Gaafar is a writer, physician, and filmmaker. Her writing has appeared in African Arguments, African Feminism, Tikisi Magazine, Andaria, and 500 Words Magazine, among many others. Her short story Light of the Desert was published in I Know Two Sudans, Gipping Press UK 2014, where it was awarded an honourable mention. Her short story Finding Descartes was published in Relations, an anthology of African and diaspora voices, published in 2023 by Harper Via. A Mouthful of Salt is her debut novel and a winner of the Island Prize 2023. Reem lives in Canada with her husband and 3 sons. Over to you, Reem.
Thank you for that introduction and for spotlighting my book. So A Mouthful of Salt is, it's my debut novel, but it was actually a short story to start with. It was always about a boy who drowns, and a boy who drowns in a village in North Sudan, and then all the events happening in the village until around his drowning. So it tells the story from the perspective of three women, two from the north and one from the south. And it kind of highlights the existing hierarchies of gender, of race that exist in Sudan, like many other countries in the region, and how being born into a specific gender or race really pretty much decides how you get along in life.
Great. Thank you so much, Reem, for that introduction. So without further ado, we're going to kick off our discussion. Oh, and I've been reminded there is a discount code to get 15% off both of these books on the Saki Books website, and it's TCBC1515. I'm sure Kira can put the link in the chat. So, Omar, over to you.
Hi, ladies. So just a reminder, my name's Omar. So it was such a pleasure to read both of your books. And I felt like I learned so much, which is such a joy when reading fiction. So with your book, Leila, as you mentioned, it's set in the 19th century, and you have a lot of mention of like the Turkish Ottoman rule and also the British invasion. And then Reem, yours is set a little bit further on, so in starting with the 1950s, even though it's split into sort of different times. So I just wanted to ask both of you, what led you to pick the eras that you did? Because they're quite a stark contrast, even though there's a lot of overlap in terms of themes. I'll start with you, Leila.
So I was interested because I've lived so long in Scotland now, and I was interested in making connections between Sudan and Scotland, and finding these kind of connections. And so I was very excited when I discovered that General Gordon of Khartoum, who I grew up reading about him in school, and knowing the palace, passing by the palace where he used to live, that he was Scottish. I didn't know that in Sudan, or not only in Sudan, but everywhere in the British Empire, officially anybody was English, apparently. It wasn't just, I thought it was the Sudanese just calling everybody Ingilese, but no, actually, officially, people's, whether they were in Scotland or Wales, this was kind of suppressed during the British Empire. And so officially all these people, when they were out there, they were English. So finding out that he was Scottish was very interesting for me. And so the book was trying to do that, to show a historical link between Sudan and Scotland. And it was a very exciting time because of this revolution, and because of Gordon being under siege and waiting for the British expedition to rescue him. And it's a very sort of I grew up with this striking image of this man standing, on the roof of the palace with his telescope, waiting for these boats to come in. So this is what I was trying to do, and also to write it from the Sudanese point of view. So it wasn't then a kind of a British story about a British having an adventure in Africa, but it was more about the Sudanese side and how they saw these events happening from their own perspectives. So for me, it was interesting, because in a way I was also like decolonizing my own education, the way I learned the story, and reading it again, and also when I read the different sources, and I went into reading also the Sudanese sources, can be very nationalistic and very uncritical of the Mahdist revolution, which overthrew the Turkish-Egyptian rule. So again, that was something that I wanted to get into, and to show that although it was a revolution that rose with this sense of injustice that the Sunnis were feeling against the Turkish Empire, after a while the revolution itself became very brutal, and and caused a lot of harm. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Leila. That really came through when reading the books as well, and all the individual chapters. But again, we're going to try and keep this spoiler free. But I do appreciate now, even more after hearing this, the Scottish character that you have in there, like that makes so much more sense too. But yeah, What about you, Reem? What made you choose this particular time?
I wish I was as scientific about my writing as I'm not. I just I write and stuff comes out. But again, as I mentioned, the story about the boy drowning in the north, that was always sometime between the 80s and the 2000s, and everything happening at that time could very easily be happening today in 2024, just because things haven't changed at all in terms of the context, in terms of the way the community, acts, and everything. I mean, not to spoil anything, but I eventually I wanted to position it before the the Islamic Brotherhood coup for several reasons, and that was the best time between the floods of 1988 and before the overthrowing of this civilian government. And then while I was writing this story, and the second character kept growing stronger and stronger. Initially, this South Sudanese character was always kind of like a mystery, but then she became a person through my writing, and then I had to, delve into her background so that I could understand what she was about. And then that led us way back into between the 30s and the 50s, just based on really trying to give her, more volume and making her, just trying to understand everything, and also to really humanize that side of the other, because the story is really about us and the other as an enemy, and the other as someone that needs to be feared or suppressed, and that this other is always they always have their own story and their own background, and I could only do that by going into their their childhood and their growing up to put that to make that clear.
Yeah, definitely. I think that really came through. And I think the way that the second and third chapter, because the third part's quite small, or the second part, which is all about her life, she felt so real. You really got a sense of like her background, her motivations, everything that she'd been through. And you did an amazing job. So I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you to both of you actually for just the amazing job that you did and making it a joy to be part of this conversation, because you made it easy.
Thank you.
I think we're passing over to me. Hi, both. I'm Jess, just in case you missed the intro. So I think one of the things that I found so sort of striking and like a very sort of unifying thread between both of your books is the way you both describe not only like the landscape of the places and the cities, but the river itself that runs through Sudan. It feels like the Nile is like almost a main character in both of your books, not just in just sort of determining geography, but how people live. It's particularly stark, Reem, in the beginning of your book, obviously, because we're talking about the drowning of a boy in the river. I just wondered how you guys sort of approach sort of incorporating landscape and the river and sort of everything that the Nile brings to Sudan into how you wrote the books, and whether it was like a sort of defining factor for you to include that kind of stuff. We can start with Reem first. Yeah.
For me, the river, I mean, in Sudan, the river Nile kind of is part of the definition of what Sudan is. It's there. It crosses the entire country. It's been there forever. When you talk about Sudan, you can't really not talk about the Nile. So it's something that's always there. Everyone knows. Everyone is kind of familiar with. Even people who don't live by the river still, they still have some kind of relationship with it. But for me, really, the River Nile is kind of it is a character on its own. It's a very difficult character for me to understand because it has so many faces. It's something that, when you live in Khartoum, you cross the bridges every day. You see it all the time. And it's nice when it's bright and sunny and people are on their boats and you're looking and you see all that, everything nice about it. But then at night, it's just like this complete black mass, which, I mean, I remember looking over the bridge one night, and you couldn't see anything, and I was like, if someone fell in, they would be lost forever. You see it in all these different ways when during the rainy season it rises up suddenly. One day it's down there, and then the other day it's right next to the bridge, and it's really dark and muddy because it's so turbulent, and it overflows the banks, and it swallows everyone's livestock and everything. And of course, there's the drowning. The drowning is, it's not something that happens just in villages or used to happen a long time ago. It happens everywhere in Sudan all the time. People who can swim, people who can't swim. You know, it's just being such a powerful and I mean, it's like I said, it's always there, but it's not your friend. So that's why it was very difficult to not include it. Also trying not to paint it as just this evil presence, which is kind of how I think about it sometimes, that it is a source of life, and it really is something that defines everything about Sudan, I think.
Yeah, I think I can only imagine, you know, like trade, how things are transported across country, just all of it is so intertwined into life there. So I think it was an amazing way of kind of bringing it into the book and sort of showcasing life in Sudan, in both books, I would say, actually, as well. Leila, same question to you, I would say.
Well, I mean, because the Sudan is desert, so the you know the Nile is important. It's just even visually striking. If you were on an aeroplane and you're landing and you see this just vast desert, and then there's a river in between. It's very kind of it's very, very striking, and it's and I remember seeing I was living in Syria once, and I saw the Euphrates, and I thought, oh, what a pathetic river, you know. What I'm from Sudan, I'm from the Nile, you call this a river? And then here also there's rivers in Aberdeen nearby, and I live near the river now, within walking distance. I feel compelled to do that. But again, I'm always comparing how powerful the Nile was, you know. I wanted the first image I had of Kwani, the main character in my book, was of her as a little girl standing in the river.
Yeah.
And when she lost her home, and she went to Al Ubaid, and that's a place which is just not, there's no rivers there. It's just there's a dependence on wells. And I had her, you know, missing the river. And then when she found it again in Khartoum, when she went to Khartoum, she recognizes the river, and that this is the river where she grew up. And so she has this connection to the river. And a lot of the tribes in South Sudan, they also thought of the river as having a spirit, because you know these were, you know, tribes who at that time, they, you know, Christianity hadn't reached there, and you know, and Islam hadn't reached there either. So there was a feeling that that there was a respect for the river, and that the river was a powerful spirit. And I kind of wanted her to have that connection with the river.
It's really amazing to hear about. Thank you so much. You're on mute, Linda.
Just a reminder, everybody. Sorry. Can you guys see me? Because I don't know, my browser's going a bit funny, but it might not matter.
I can't see you, Mimi, personally, but we can hear you loud and clear. So go ahead and ask your question.
If you can hear me, that's the most important bit.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to remind everybody, before I ask my question, just a reminder, please do send in your questions for Reem and Leila using the Q&A that Linda mentioned on the screen. So please don't forget to send in your questions, because this is an opportunity not to be missed. So the question I wanted to ask you both was really, it's quite a complicated one, because I think what these novels do so well is cover such a range of different themes from a very kind of family / sort of domestic viewpoint. So we go through the north-south divide, rich versus poor, the impact of colonialism, the impact of invasion, you know, the Arab versus the Black African, Muslims versus the tribal communities versus the Christian communities. It really does cover so much, you know, colorism, race, religion, everything. So I wanted to kind of ask you both, what was important to you about that from a domestic perspective, I guess, from looking at these things through a family perspective? And, you know, what were the considerations you made when you were writing it? And obviously, you know, I appreciate, Reem, what you said is that things just kind of come to you. So maybe to start with you, Reem, in terms of when you were writing and developing these characters and these stories as they were coming to you, what was important to you about those kind of themes and the kind of conflicts that society had at that time?
That's a pretty complicated question.
Yeah, sorry.
one thing that's very striking to me, and what really kind of came out during the story, is that when we talk about, for women in particular, when we talk about barriers that they face in the community or in their lives in general, they're faced by several layers. It's their immediate family, their extended family, and then the community as a whole. So if they do get past one, they might not get past the other. And if they do get past the other, they will definitely not get past the community or the society. And so that's really kind of the way I was kind of unwrapping these layers when I was trying to get these stories of these women out, or the way that they were facing all these challenges around them. In that they had all these different barriers to get over, and it always starts with the home. So for one of the main characters, she's in a supportive household, but she can't get past the second and the third layers. For the others, it's the opposite. She's in an unsupportive. She's not in a supportive household. She's in an abusive household. So she's stuck at square one. And for the third, she's come over those two barriers, but then she still has this society, which she has been. All of them have been born into this society. So because it always starts at home, I think maybe that's why I was looking at it from that lens. Yeah, so it kind of, you just have all these layers that you have to go through to be able to to get to the other side, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. That's a very good answer to my very convoluted question. I'm very sorry. Thank you, Reem. And Leila, if you can also make your way through my convoluted question, it would be great to understand the kind of the themes of the conflicts of those in society in river spirits.
Yeah, so what I found when I was researching, I was sort of impressed and surprised at how much people traveled. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought that in the 19th century people were moving. They were going on camels to different parts of the country. There's sometimes I think we get a sense of Africa as being like kind of a stagnant, the dark continent, and it's kind of like fixed. And then suddenly, Europe comes in and things start to bubble. But actually, people were moving around. There was trade. There was through the boats and also through the camels. I loved all the parts I wrote in the novel about the man traveling on the camel, and so with this travel comes the interaction with different ethnicities. The intermarriage, as this happens in Reem's novel, that one of the character goes to the south and he marries a woman from there. So this movement causes these this interactions between people. They get married, they adopt a child from another tribe. The child grows up, this, that, people, so that is where the friction comes in, and people are not in a kind of a very stable. I didn't feel that growing up either, and I didn't feel it with the research that there wasn't this stability that you sometimes, this kind of middle class fixedness that you get in other countries or in other novels. We have this fluid nature in Sudanese society, and I think that brings with it, of course, a lot of richness, but it also brings with it these conflicts. And so you can actually explore these bigger issues within the home. And one of the things I always admired, when I was growing up in Sudan, at how people could have within the same family, people could have very different points of view politically, for example, but still the family bonds would be strong. My brother is my brother, even though he could be whatever. And later on, meeting other cultures, and I was surprised that people didn't have these strong ties, whatever, that I saw in Sudan. And so I think that's an interesting thing, that the family ties can be very strong despite all the different the ethnicities and the people coming from different places.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you very much, Leila. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what you both said about just the Nile, for starters, is a mighty beast. If you ever fly over it, you're like, wow, what is the Thames in comparison? Absolutely nothing. So that's number one. But also, yeah, it's such a melting pot of cultures, traditions. It's so vibrant, both novels. I don't think I've read a novel that's set in either of those periods in Sudan, especially not the 1880s Ottoman Sudan, for starters. But also, Reem, the way you divided your novel was so, I love the contrast between both, because I didn't see anything coming. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I know the girls didn't know what was going to happen either. So we were very, very shocked by the ending. So I'm not going to spoil it. I'm just going to let you know, guys, who's on the call, if you haven't read it, you're going to be shocked by the ending. So that brings me to my question about the strong women protagonists in the novels. Obviously, it's a very patriarchal society that we're talking about. You know, men rule the roost, they're going to war, you know, they're going out doing the trading, the business, etc. But it's the women that run the families and hold the culture and the family tradition and the family history. So we picked out a few of the key women that sort of stood out in our mind from both novels. In A Mouthful of Salt, we've got Fatma, we've got Yamkeen, and when we've got in River Spirit, we've got Zamzam or Akwani, we've got Hadija. So we just wanted to get a little bit more of a flavor and understanding from both of you about, you know, the importance of these women characters in your novels. So I'll go to Leila first.
Yeah, well, sometimes, unfortunately, the women also impose these restrictions. It's not really the men imposing the restrictions all the time. It's also the women, the older women, or sometimes even the younger women who are, you know, restricting other women. And so in the case of the Khadija Akwani, so Akwani becomes enslaved by the wife of the Turkish governor, and Khadija is the cook in the household. And Khadija is interesting because she's not enslaved. She's actually somebody who has you know, bought her freedom, and she's a Muslim, and she's actually been on Hajj, so she has this kind of self sort of dignity and respect. But she also is always telling Akwani, you know, you're very lucky to be in the governor's in the governor's house. You need to be grateful, young girl, and so on. So she's kind of imposes these restrictions. So yeah, the women can be terrifying, and the women can be tyrannical. You know, it's really very, very scary. And I grew up really with this impression. I mean, with that, before reading and kind of understanding of men as being sort of kind and, you know, gentle. And the women are the one you're to be scared of. They're the ones who are going to get you into trouble. But of course, as you get up, you understand, you know, you get a better, kind of a deeper understanding of what goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like they sort of aid it, don't they, to keep it going. That whole prestige of working in the governor's house, you can, you know,
Yes.
you can prestige, you know, like just like you should be grateful for being here. But yeah, like that also made me chuckle. Over to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially in our cultures, older women in particular are the ones who kind of set the scene, and they make sure that everything stays the way it should, even in things like that they have personally been harmed by, like for example, the practice of female genital mutilation. It's the older women who insist that it keep on, you know, people do it. It's not the men; they don't care. It's the women who do it, and then they impose it even on their, not just their direct relatives, but you know, other like in-laws and etc. So they do play an unfortunately important role in harming their own kind, and just to maintain whatever idea they have of tradition and purity. But in general, I mean, Sudanese women they live in very difficult circumstances. They live in a very difficult society. Of course, this change it differs from place to place and by level of education, by etc. For example, I don't live in an oppressive area because I come from an educated family, but others, the vast majority do until today. And this is why, just like when I was writing this, it could have been set today in 2024 because just because of that reality that hasn't changed. but at the same time, I mean, it was difficult to write about them as just victims. I mean, it didn't work because it doesn't really match what they are. Even if they do suffer, that much, you can't really put them just in, just to live as perpetual victims forever. And in fact, even it's in lots of areas in Sudan, for example, in the West, the only thing the men do is go to war. Women do everything else. They do the trading, they do the building their homes, and they do the agriculture and the storing the grains for winter and drought, and they do all of that stuff. And then when the men just go to war when there is a war, that's why they probably make up their own wars just to have something to do. And even though they have that's such an important role in keeping people alive, they still have no role in politics or important tribal decisions or something like that. So it's just because that's imposed on them, not because they're not able to.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really annoys me. Like even one of the characters, the mother of the drowned boy, she has such a sad story, but it was difficult for me to just keep her as a victim of this reality that she's in. And so in the end, she did have to have some kind of role in taking charge of her life, even if it was just walking away. So I mean, it's difficult to just portray them all as victims because they're not all victims.
No, definitely not. And it didn't come across that way at all. Like, they're all strong women in their own right, doing their own thing. And I wanted to ask you both, so who are the favorite characters for you to write? I'll ask Leila first.
For me, my favorite character was Yasin in the book. I liked him. I liked him a lot. And for me, he was like a hero because he stuck to his opinion and his his assessment of the man who claimed he was the Mahdi, and I thought it was an intriguing position to be in because at the same time he works for the government, so it's very easy. It was very easy for his opponents to say to him, "Oh, you're in the government, you're in the pocket of the government, you're supping with the Sultan," and so on, and yet he stuck to his position, and I found that quite admirable, and so I liked writing about him. Yes.
Yeah, no, he was a great character. We love a rebel.
Thank you.
We love a bit of a rebel. And Reem, what about you?
Fatima in particular is a character that I have known for a long time. She already existed in a story on her own, and it was actually inspired by a true story by a girl who wanted to have an education and be a doctor. And she again had to face all these barriers, but that person had her father who stood by her side, and she eventually made it. So that was Fatima for a very long time. I brought her into the story, or she kind of wandered into the story just because she's been so present in my mind for such a long time. It was also a bit, even though I kind of know her pretty well, it was a bit challenging to just walk alongside her as she was processing right towards the end everything that she knows about life and everything she thought she knew about herself and her family, and then coming to the conclusion that they aren't as good or as perfect as they thought they were, and just kind of reaching that conclusion. So that was a bit challenging for me as well, because these are all thought processes that we've all been through as we grow older and we realize our own implicit role in the society that we live in. There's also another character who was her fiance. He was a very minor character, but again, he kind of grew as well through the story. And just also, I ended up liking him, even though he was a bit of an idiot to start with. But
Very
just
much
also,
so, Reem.
yeah.
He was an idiot. I'm glad you said it.
But then just kind of developing him into that, fuller version of himself, I did end up kind of liking him in the end as well.
Yeah. No, that he was a good character. I did think that he was a good vehicle for something, but yes, it was good.
I think I also just want to mention Salafa's mother-in-law, because you wrote such a terrifying woman. Like, I was genuinely terrified of this, and just her mean-spiritedness, she was just horrendous. So, props to you for writing such a character.
Yeah, I almost said she was my favorite person to write, but then I thought that would sound weird. But so evil. Who
That's a whole other conversation, Reem, to unpick why that would be the case.
We love a villain-ish.
Yeah.
Well, we need a character like that, don't we? Wouldn't be complete without a character like that. I feel like if I let loose, then I'm just going to spoil this book for everyone, because I've got so many questions to ask, but it's going to spoil the plot for everyone who's on the call. So, does anyone have any questions? I can't see any.
I can see one in the chat, because I think, yeah, Hilda, hi Hilda, has said that the Q&A is not loading properly. So I'll ask on Hilda's behalf.
Okay.
So it's a question for both authors. As these novels take place in the past, during your research, what did you struggle the most with, or what was the biggest challenge? And what was your most surprising discovery? And how did this impact the storylines? There's quite a few questions in there. Thanks, Hilda. So in terms of, start with the beginning, kind of in terms of doing research into something that was written a little while ago. What were the kind of biggest challenges? Leila, would you mind kicking us off with that?
Well, for me, the biggest, the shocking discovery was when I went to Durham University, where they have the Sudan archives, and I found a bill of sale for a woman, and this woman was called Zamzam. Yeah, and it was written, the person who was buying her and the person who was selling her and the amount of money and her name, and it said that he was buying her for his aunt, not for himself, and. I mean, I'd known that slavery existed in Sudan. It's just common knowledge, and I knew it, and I knew people who I knew were descendants of enslaved people. And I had even a friend in university who used to boast about her slave catcher grandfather and the whip he had. I mean, I knew all of that, but just to see the bill of sale was such a shock for me. It was just it just made it very, very real. And so this was the big shock for me, and that's how I, came up with the character of Akwani. The challenge for me in writing the book was that there were very few primary sources written by women. It was all men. You're reading about the men and what the men did, and so I had to really look in the footnotes to find the stories of the women, and also to make them up. I mean, it became then, well, that's something for me as the creative writer to do, and because I can't find all this information about the women, or I can't hear these women's voices over the years, then I have to then fill in the gaps. So, but that it was, I mean, I would have loved to have, found more sources from a woman's perspective. Yeah.
Thanks, Leila. What about you, Reem?
I think pretty much quite similar. I mean, I'll start with the most difficult part of doing the research, and this is something that I've struggled with before while I was writing another novel that I'm working on now, is that just the resources, finding reliable resources that are critical, well written, and aren't personal opinions of people who think they know what actually happened. This is especially a challenge in more modern history of Sudan. I was working on before I was working on something that took part from the 60s, the socialist regimes and everything I read, and these are published books. They were literally just personal opinions. They weren't anything you could, and everything was different. Everyone was saying, the opposite of what everyone else said. Also doing the research for this book, particularly way back in the from the 1900s to the 1950s, everything about South Sudan, everything almost is written by the invaders. And I was doing my research in English and in Arabic. I found very little written by Sudanese people. The vast majority has been written, and they're very detailed, scholarly writing. I'm not sure about their methodologies, etc. But I mean, I would say they're reliable, but just having that one-sided opinion of everything.
Yeah.
There was a lot of research back then, which was nice, but it was just a bit troubling. And then I was talking to friends. I went to a South Sudanese university. I have South Sudanese friends, and I was asking them, could you ask your parents and your aunts and your grandparents? And I was getting very little information because there's a great disconnect, I think, between you know, even in how certain words are pronounced or how they're written, because that hasn't been documented very well. So just not having that insider account of things happening, that it kind of made me, you know, doubt how reliable it was, and also quite unfair that people weren't telling their own stories.
Mm.
Uh, one shocking thing was also about slavery. I didn't find, you know, anything dramatic, but just reading, there was a lot written about this, about the slave trade back then, and the role of Northerners and other people, of course, in enslaving people from the South and other areas. And I remember reading, I think it was Zubair Basha's, one of his holding places for slaves, and how they were storing these slaves while they were alive, you know, places underground, and just reading this really horrific, you know, account of the conditions where slaves were held. That was very, very bothering. And also, one thing I remember that bothered me a lot when I was looking about information about toxic waste that was buried in the north. We all know that there was some toxic waste that was buried in the north. I wasn't sure, you know, where and when. I found a bunch of, you know, articles about this, and it was very bothering to really read about how Sudanese governments allowed other countries to bring all their toxic waste and bury them in our country in different areas, especially in the north, which is where I'm from, which is why we have such a horrific rate of cancers at the time. So just seeing that actual evidence in front of me was very bothering, even though it shouldn't have been surprising.
It's very troubling. And I suppose the research just uncovers so much stuff in history that we, as the reader, don't even appreciate. We've got another.
It's also just to interject that. Sorry, guys, because I know you can't see me, but I think the point you make, Reem, is a really important one, that history is written by the victor. So there is so much that's lost that fiction has the power to kind of pull out and highlight, which is why books like this are really special, because they're steeped in truth, they're steeped in reality, often a version of reality that we don't get to experience, because, as I say, history is written by the victor, or the supposed victor. So yeah, I think it's a really important point to make.
Yeah, that's why Own Voices books are so important, and we really champion that as much as possible. So we've got a question here from Bacola. Both authors are obviously proud of Sudan. Did this pride increase or diminish during the research and writing process?
Ouch.
Always going to get a nice challenging question from Bacola, that's for sure. I'll direct this to Leila first.
Well, since the war, the pride there's no pride at all. I feel very ashamed. So it's, you know, I don't remember now feeling the time that I felt proud. But I guess there was a time, but it's been very overwhelming now since the war, which started a year ago, and it was a shock. It came as a shock, and so I guess it's difficult to feel proud now, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Leila.
Yeah.
What about you, Reem?
I mean, yeah, it is kind of difficult. I mean, especially because the things that I was writing about are not things that, you know, they're not nice things about the society. There are a lot of nice things about Sudanese people in the Sudanese society, a lot of nice things, but there are also these not nice things, which every society has, of course. But just focusing on them so much, and then just seeing, you know, how far back they go and how deep they are and how damaging they've been, and also how annoying it is that people are still holding on to a lot of these things. That did really irritate me a lot, and it still does. Obviously, I feel strongly about these things all the time. That's why I wanted, you know, to write about them. In the context of this war, it's been a bit difficult, and that's why I kind of, you know, just because I was writing about these things and then this war happens, which is I mean, we're all victims of this war at this time. And so just kind of talking about these things while people are at their most vulnerable did make me kind of feel bad. But then again, and this is something that I was discussing with my husband, is that, you know, our generation, we really need to come to terms with these things that are a part of our society. And I think one thing about my story and about Miss Leila's story and all of these other historical fictions is that they show us that where we are now is a result of where we were before. So we have to acknowledge this past, and we have to acknowledge that, you know, whatever happens tomorrow will also be a result of this. But then acknowledging it in a way that allows us to break this cycle of all this ugliness that's been happening, and it keeps on happening. And, you know, it has to stop at some point. We can't just, you know, keep learning about it and acknowledging it, but then allowing it to repeat itself. I mean, it has to stop at some point. So I think, you know, at this point, not feeling very proud of what, you know, our people have been doing, or what we have been allowing to happen is I mean, it's okay, but what are we going to do about it later? That's the question. I mean, we have to do something, especially since we've, you know, we've sunken so low in life, you know, because of this. You know, we have to kind of find a way to just stop it and move on.
Thanks for sharing that, Reem. I suppose a question for both of you, for the audience and those who've yet to read the book, is what would you want, like, what's the one takeaway that you want people to gain from reading the book? So I'll start with you, Leila.
Oh, I wanted to avoid this question.
Did you completely? Okay, fine. I'll ask you another one.
Ask me another one.
And ask you another one. Right. I suppose, to be fair, it is hard to get just one thing out of River Spirit. But
Okay.
I think
what's the next? Is there a book that we can expect from you, or am I not allowed to ask that question either? What's in the pipeline? Am I not allowed to ask that one? Shall I move on? Is that vetted as well?
I think there's definitely like a couple more questions in the chat if we've got time to ask them.
I can't see any.
No, it's all right. Don't worry. I save you. But there's a couple more, and I think we probably have time for the two that are the two earlier ones. So the first question is from Amna. Thank you for your question, Amna. What was the biggest challenging in publishing as Sudanese female authors? So yeah, Leila, just take that one first. That's a better question to answer.
Yes, this is a good question.
Sure.
Okay, so I think it's because the publishers don't know about Sudan enough. You know, it's not the same as if you're coming from an Indian writer or a Nigerian writer. So in a publishing world, if you're coming from writing in English, publishers in the English language speaking world, they're more familiar with certain countries than other countries, and so they feel better able to judge and better able to enter fictional worlds of countries that they are already familiar with. They've already read a lot of Indian writers, they've already read a lot of Nigerian writers, and so they're more comfortable taking on a book about that. Whereas what comes with Sudan, it's an unknown entity. It's, you know, it's difficult to judge either or. This is what I feel. Yeah,
I agree with that. I remember, I think every single person who read this book before it was actually, you know, finally published, and even some short stories I had published before that, they would all tell me the same thing, is that this is the first time we read something about Sudan. This is the first time we really know what it's like, you know, it's all new to them. And when this book was picked up by Saki, you know, we couldn't get it's been a challenge finding you know, other publishers, for example, in North America, who would be interested, because they, you know, they just feel it's not for them, it's not for their audiences, it's not something that people are familiar with or something that would sell, for example. So that is a pretty big challenge. I mean, up until now, the only Sudanese writer I know who has been writing in English has been Leila Aboulela. We've been reading her books for years, and she's the only person that we brag about. I'm happy to finally be able to, you know, get a little bit out there, but really we don't have, and the rest of it is our pieces of work. There's also Jamal Mahjoub and recently Fatin Abbas, but most of it is work that's been published, translated from Arabic. So that's a challenge, you know, just kind of having that visibility.
Cool. Thank you, Reem. Thanks, Leila. We've got a question in the actual Q&A bit from Ralph Goosens. So he's asked this to Leila. Can you tell me a bit more about the link between spirituality and the body? I'm thinking of the ascetic life of the Mahdi as religious leader, and for Akwani, how she's drawn to / feels the river spirit, whilst also, while she also comes across as very much at home in her body?
That will be a spoiler, so
It will be, won't it?
It will be. It will be. There's a long there's a long question about writing about South Sudanese characters. Both
Should we
of
go
us.
to that one? Okay.
Yeah, that one.
All right. So, is this from MA? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. I want to ask about writing about South Sudanese characters as writers from Sudan. There is a lot of tension between both countries because of the shared history of centuries of slavery as well as the decades of civil wars. How did you approach writing these characters, especially because, as you have just mentioned in the conversation, history is written by victors. And in this context, Sudan has silenced and marginalized South Sudan for a long time. They want your thoughts on this.
Reem, you did a lot about that. Yeah.
You want to go first? Okay, I'll answer this question because this was something that I had a lot of trouble with. I didn't want to write about South Sudan at all. I avoided it for as long as possible. The first 12 drafts of A Mouthful of Salt did not touch on South Sudan, but it became impossible not to go there. And I only finally started writing after I had done a ton of research. I actually blocked 2 whole weeks. Even more than that, actually. But 2 whole weeks where I was not working on anything, not working on my PhD. I even got someone to babysit because I had to do everything that I could so that when I did write about it, I would do it justice. And I'm, again, someone who went to a South Sudanese university. I'm not unfamiliar. I didn't live in South Sudan. At the time, it was North and South. One country. And someone who has, lots of South Sudanese friends. I'm not someone who's completely removed. But again, it was very important for me that I get it right and that I do it as much justice as I can because of that very tense relationship that we have with each other and because of all the pain and the hurt that has happened in the past. In the very far past and near on with the secession and everything that happened. So I did what I know how to do. I'm a researcher. I do research and I make sure that I'm doing proper, responsible research. And I spoke with people as well. I had 2 of my South Sudanese friends and also a scholar from South Sudan. And also when we did finally get the book out, I asked that it was very important that a South Sudanese scholar also have a look at it and give me their review. So Dr. Francis Deng did me that honor and he was very happy. And then I was very happy that, he felt that it was kind of, okay. So that's how I went about it. I don't know if I did it 100% what it deserves, but I did 100%, more than 100% than what I could, to do it as much justice as I could.
Thanks for sharing that, Reem. Leila, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think that, it's, as you said, you mentioned the own voices, the best thing is to read, writers from South Sudan. I mean, for example, Stella Gaetano's book, Ido's Soul, she writes in Arabic. Stella Gaetano is from South Sudan, but she writes from Arabic, and her book was recently translated into English, and it's called Ido's Souls, Ido's Souls. And so, yeah, I mean, nothing. Of course, if you are, it's always problematic if you're writing about someone who's not you. But then, as a writer, where are you going to draw the line? I mean, would I never write about a man, for example, because I'm not a man, or would I never write about when I was young? Now I'm going to say an older person. I'm now an older person, but when I was young, I was writing about older people. I mean, there isn't really a way of drawing the line. But I guess this question made me think that I probably couldn't have written all my novel from the point of view of Akwani. I couldn't have had the whole novel from a single voice, a single perspective of this young girl from South Sudan. That's why I had all these other voices as well. So there were other characters who were more like myself. But I mean, I guess that's the fun of writing. That's the enjoyment of, of being able to connect with different characters from different backgrounds, and to kind of link with them and to share. We all have things in common, and we can always see things from another person's point of view. I guess, if we kind of work hard enough. Yeah.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you, Reem. We are pretty much out of time, and I just wanted to say echo some of the thanks that we've seen in the chat from Shazza Saleh, for example, that she wants to thank both Leila and Reem for writing about Sudan in English, because it's not an easy job to do, to make the world know about Sudan. So thank you very much. Great writers is what she's saying. And I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the Candid Book Club as well. Like, we enjoyed both of the novels. We learned so much as well. And I think for us, education through reading literature and historical fiction specifically is just something that you can't take for granted. So we're so grateful to have come across your work and for your time tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation. For everyone, I hope we haven't touched any spoilers. We have a problem with that, so I hope that we haven't spoiled anything. And before we finish, a reminder of where to follow Leila on Instagram. It's Leila Aboulela. And where to buy River Spirit is on sakibooks.com. And where to follow Reem, it's Reem's Perspective on Instagram. And also to buy A Mouthful of Salt is on sakibooks.com. And don't forget the discount code, which is TCBC15. I feel like I should work for an advert. And also where to find Candid Book Club is the Candid Book Club on Instagram and all the other social media platforms. And that, I think, concludes our conversation. So just a massive thank you again, Leila, Reem, and all of you tonight. So,
and to Saki Books as well for organising.
Of course. Thank you, Kira, for setting this all up and inviting us to host this conversation.
And again, just thank you to everyone who's joined for your wonderful messages in the chat as well. It's been really nice to read, and we just want to thank you as readers who make, authors' lives or job so much easier by reading their wonderful stories. So we just can't wait to see what's next from both of you. So again, just a huge thank you to you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, guys. Bye.
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 Bye. Take care.
Bye. Bye.